Jiwan wiped the sweat from his forehead as he looked at the strange readings on his scanner. The device kept beeping with sounds he had never heard before. He was deep inside a canyon on the planet Kepler 442b, far away from the human research base where he worked. The red rocks around him were covered with marks that looked very old. Some of the marks glowed with a soft blue light when the twin suns hit them just right. Jiwan had been studying these rocks for 3 months, but today something was different. His scanner was going crazy. He knelt down and touched one of the glowing symbols. The moment his finger made contact, the symbol pulsed brighter. A wave of energy seemed to flow through the rock and into the ground beneath his feet. Jiwan pulled his hand back quickly and looked around. Nothing seemed to have changed, but he felt like something was watching him. The feeling was right. From behind a large boulder, a figure stepped into view. Jiwan's heart jumped. He had never seen anything like this before. The being was tall and thin, with smooth violet skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Her face was similar to a human's but more angular, with large silver eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Most amazing of all, her skin had patterns of light that moved across her body like living tattoos. These lights pulsed faster as she came closer to Jiwan. She wore simple robes that seemed to be made from some kind of plant fiber, and her movements were graceful like a dancer. Jiwan reached for his radio to call the base, but the alien being raised her hand. She pulled out a small device that looked like a crystal and spoke into it. When she spoke again, the words came out in perfect English. "Please do not be afraid, human Jiwan," she said. Her voice was soft but carried a strange musical quality. "My name is Nara. I have been waiting for you." Jiwan's mouth fell open. "How do you know my name? How do you speak English?" Nara held up the crystal device. "This translator has been learning your language since your people arrived on our world. And we know your name because you are the one our legends speak of." "Legends?" Jiwan asked. He slowly stood up, keeping his hands where she could see them. "What legends?" Nara's silver eyes studied his face carefully. The light patterns on her skin pulsed even faster now. "For many generations, my people have told stories of the star wanderers who would return. The stories say one would come who carries the ancient fire in his essence." She pointed at Jiwan's scanner, which was still beeping wildly. "Your device senses what my people have always known. You are different from the other humans. When you touch the sacred symbol," it responded. "To you, this has never happened before." Jiwan looked down at the glowing mark on the rock. "Sacred symbol? I thought these were just old carvings." "They are much more than that," Nara said. She walked closer, and Jiwan noticed that the symbols around them were starting to glow brighter. "These marks were placed here by my ancestors. Long ago, they have waited 10,000 years for someone like you to awaken them." "Someone like me?" Jiwan asked. "I'm just an archaeologist. I study old things." "There's nothing special about me," Nara shook her head. "You are wrong. My people are called the Villani. We have watched your kind since you first arrived on our world. Most humans make the symbols go dark when they touch them, but you make them sing with light." As if to prove her point, Nara gestured to the rocks around them. Jiwan could see that more symbols were starting to glow. They formed patterns that seemed to point deeper into the canyon. "The elders of my people have been waiting for this day," Nara continued. "They sent me to find you when the signs showed that the time had come, but we must hurry. There is not much time left." "Time for what?" Jiwan asked. Nara's expression became serious. "Time to prevent a great disaster. Time to save both our peoples. The ancient temple must be awakened, and you are the only one who can do it." Jiwan felt confused and overwhelmed. "I don't understand any of this. Why me? Why now?" "Because the old enemies are stirring again," Nara said. Her light patterns had changed to deeper, more urgent colors. "My people have hidden for many generations, but we cannot hide forever. The temple holds the key to our survival, but it will only open for one with your special nature." She stepped closer to Jiwan. "I know this is hard to believe. Your people think they are alone in the universe, but you are not. You are returning home, even if you do not remember." "Returning home?" Jiwan repeated. But humans are from Earth. We've only been traveling to other worlds for a few hundred years. Nara smiled sadly. Your history books do not tell the whole truth. There are things your people have forgotten, important things. The temple will help you remember. Jiwan looked at his scanner again. The readings were getting stronger. Whatever was happening, it was getting more intense. He thought about his team back at the base. They would be worried if he didn't check in soon. I should contact my team, he said. They need to know about this. No, Nara said firmly. Not yet. If too many humans come at once, the temple's defenses will activate. It must be just you and me for now. Later, when the temple is awakened, there will be time to bring others. Yuan hesitated. Everything in his training told him to be careful, to follow proper procedures. But something deep inside him was responding to Nara's words. The glowing symbols seemed to be calling to him. If I come with you, he said, how do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't some kind of trap? Nara extended her hand toward him. Because of this, she said. When her hand came near his, both of their bodies began to glow with the same soft light as the symbols. We are connected, you and I, your people and mine were allies once. It is time for that alliance to be reborn. Yuan stared at the light surrounding them. His scanner was beeping so fast it sounded like a continuous tone. Against all logic, he felt that Nara was telling the truth. How far is this temple? He asked. Nara smiled. 3 days' journey into the deep wilderness. But I promise you, human. Jiwan, it will change everything you thought you knew about your people and mine. Jiwan made his decision. He turned off his scanner and put it in his pack. Lead the way. Jiwan followed Nara through paths that no human had ever walked before. The Villani moved with grace across the rocky ground, her feet finding perfect balance on stones that would have made Jiwan slip and fall. Her skin patterns continued to pulse, with soft light, changing colors as they moved through different areas of the canyon. They had been walking for 2 hours when Jiwan's radio crackled to life. The voice of his team leader, Dr. Martinez, came through clearly. Jiwan, where are you? You missed your check-in time. The GPS shows you're way off your planned route. Jiwan looked at Nara, who had stopped and was watching him carefully. He pressed the radio button and said, I'm following some interesting readings deeper into the canyon system. Everything is fine. I'll be back in a few days. A few days? Dr. Martinez sounded worried. Jiwan, you only pack supplies for 1 day? And you're heading into unmapped territory. That's against all safety rules. Nara stepped closer and whispered, Tell him you found water and shelter. Tell him the readings are too important to abandon. Jiwan hesitated, then spoke into the radio. Again, I found fresh water and good shelter. The energy readings here are unlike anything we've seen before. This could be the discovery we've been looking for. There was silence for a long moment. Then Dr. Martinez replied, Fine, but I'm sending a search team if you don't report back in 3 days. And keep your GPS on at all times. Understood, Jiwan said. He clipped the radio back to his belt and looked at Nara. I don't like lying. To my team, sometimes truth must wait for the right time, Nara said gently. Your team would not understand what we are doing. They would try to stop us, and that would put everyone in danger. They continued walking as the suns began to set. The landscape around them changed dramatically as they moved away from the familiar red rocks of the canyon. Soon they were walking through a forest of crystal trees that reached high into the sky. These trees were nothing like the plants Jiwan had studied before. They were made of some kind of living crystal that bent and swayed in the wind. As the evening breeze moved through them, the trees created beautiful musical sounds that filled the air with harmony. This is incredible, Jiwan said, stopping to touch one of the crystal branches. The moment his skin made contact, the tree's music became louder and more complex. I've never seen anything like this, Nara smiled. The singing forests have been here since before my people's recorded history. We believe they were grown by the same ancient ones who built the temples. The same ones who left the symbols in the canyon? Jiwan asked. Yes, Nara said. My people call them the first builders. They created many wonders on our world before they disappeared. As they walked deeper into the crystal forest, Nara began to tell Jiwan about her people's history. The Villani had once been a great civilization that traveled among the stars. They had built cities on many worlds and shared knowledge with other species across the galaxy. What happened to them? Jiwan asked. Why do your people live in simple villages now instead of great cities? Nara's light patterns dimmed to darker colors. A great catastrophe came from the dark spaces between stars. Machines that devoured entire worlds, turning everything into more machines. My ancestors called them the endless hunger. She paused to pick a crystal fruit from one of the trees. The first builders and my ancestors worked together to hide the most important knowledge and technology in sealed temples. Then they scattered to different worlds, hoping to survive until the danger passed. And you think these machines might come back? Jiwan asked. Our watchers in the deep sky have detected strange signals, Nara said. The same patterns that appeared before the endless hunger came the first time. That is why the temple must be awakened now. They made camp that night beside a stream that flowed through the crystal forest. The water was pure and clean, and it glowed with the same soft light as Nara's skin patterns. Jiwan filled his water bottles while Nara gathered crystal fruits for them to eat. As they sat by a small fire, Jiwan asked the question that had been bothering him all day. Why do you think I'm the person your legends talk about? What makes humans special? Nara was quiet for a long time before answering. The legends say that the Star Wanderers had a special gift. They could touch the ancient technology and make it respond in ways that other species could not. When you touch the symbols today, you prove that humans still carry this gift. But how is that possible? Jiwan asked. Humans evolved on Earth. We've never been to space until recently. Nara looked up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Perhaps your people's history is not what you think it is. Perhaps you have been away from home for so long that you have forgotten where you came from. The idea seemed impossible to Jiwan, but he remembered how naturally his touch had awakened the ancient symbols. There was something about this world that felt familiar, even though he had never been here before. The next morning, they left the crystal forest and began climbing toward higher ground. Nara led them across bridges made of floating stones that hung in the air with no visible support. These bridges responded to Nara's presence, glowing brighter as she stepped on them. How do they work? Jiwan asked as they crossed one of the impossible structures. The biosignature recognition, Nara explained. The first builders designed them to respond to Villani life signs. But watch what happens when you step forward. Jiwan moved ahead of Nara onto the floating stones. Instead of dimming, the bridge began to pulse with even brighter light. The stones under his feet felt warm and somehow alive. Remarkable, Nara said. The bridges recognize you as well. This confirms what the elders suspected. Your people and mine share a connection that goes back to the beginning. On the second day of their journey, they encountered other signs of the ancient civilization. Carved pillars rose from the ground at regular intervals, each one covered with symbols similar to those Jiwan had found in the canyon. When he touched them, they activated displays of light that showed star maps and diagrams he could not understand. What do these maps show? He asked Nara. The locations of other temples, she replied. There are dozens of them scattered across many worlds, all waiting for someone with your gift to awaken them. As they made camp on the second night, Jiwan realized how much his life had changed in just 2 days. He was no longer just an archaeologist studying old rocks. He was part of something much bigger and more important than he had ever imagined. Tomorrow we reach the temple, Nara said, as they watched the twin moons rise over the horizon. Are you ready for what you might discover there? Jiwan looked at his hands, thinking about the power they seemed to contain. I don't know if anyone can be ready for something like this, but I have to try. On the third morning, Jiwan woke to find Nara standing at the edge of their camp, staring at the horizon. Her skin patterns were moving faster than he had ever seen them, shifting between deep blues and bright silvers. Something had changed. What is it? He asked, packing his gear quickly. The twin moons are in perfect alignment, Nara said without turning around. This only happens once every few months. Today's the day we can see the temple in its full form. They walked for 3 more hours across a flat plain covered with smooth black stones. The stones were perfectly round and arranged in complex patterns that seemed to have meaning. When Jiwan stepped on them, they warmed under his feet and began to glow with soft white light. The path is welcoming you, Nara observed. Even the approach stones recognize your presence. As they crested a small hill, Jiwan stopped and stared. In amazement, before them stood the most incredible structure he had ever seen. The temple was massive, rising from the ground like a mountain made by intelligent hands. But what made it truly impossible was its shape. The building seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Walls curved in directions that hurt to look at directly. Towers twisted upward in spirals that appeared to go higher than they actually were. Surfaces reflected light that came from no visible source. How is this possible? Jiwan asked, rubbing his eyes. The geometry doesn't make sense. The first builders understood things about space and reality that we have forgotten, Nara explained. They built their most important temples using principles that bend the normal rules. As they approached the temple, Jiwan could see that its base was partially buried in the tidal zone. When the twin moons aligned just right, the strange gravitational pull lowered the water level enough to reveal the full structure. During other times, much of the temple remained hidden beneath the surface. My people have guarded this place. For 10,000 years, Nara said. Generation after generation of Villani have lived nearby, keeping watch, waiting for the right person to arrive. They reached the temple's outer wall, which was covered in carvings that made the canyon symbols. Look simple by comparison. These carvings moved and shifted as Jiwan watched them, telling stories and pictures that changed depending on the angle of view. What do the stories say? Jiwan asked. Nara studied the moving pictures carefully. They tell of a great alliance between many different peoples. The Star Wanderers were at the center of this alliance. They had the gift of making ancient technology respond to their will. She pointed to one section where the carvings showed figures that looked remarkably human, working alongside beings like herself. Here, you can see your ancestors and mind-building defenses against the endless hunger. They worked together to hide the most powerful knowledge until it would be safe to use again. They found the entrance to the temple, a massive doorway sealed with what appeared to be solid energy. Nara placed her hand against the barrier, and it flickered but remained closed. For thousands of years, my people have tried to enter the inner chambers, she said. The outer rooms respond to our touch, but the seal has never opened. We believed it would only open for the returning Star Wanderers. Jiwan stepped forward and placed his hand next to Nara's on the energy barrier. The moment his skin made contact, the seal began to dissolve like mist in the wind. Beyond the doorway, light started coming on in chambers that had been dark for millennia. Incredible, Nara whispered. You did it. The temple is awakening. They entered the first chamber, and Jiwan gasped at what he saw. The walls were covered with displays that showed moving pictures of space, stars, and planets. Information flowed across the surfaces in languages he didn't recognize, but somehow he felt like he almost understood them. The knowledge centers are activating, Nara said, her voice filled with awe. These contain the accumulated wisdom of dozens of civilizations. As they moved deeper into the temple, more systems came online in response to Jiwan's presence. Machines emerged from hidden compartments in the walls. Crystalline computers began humming with power. Most amazing of all, a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared in the center of the main chamber. The map showed hundreds of star systems, with lines of light connecting many of them. Some areas pulsed with steady light, while others flickered weakly or remained dark. What am I looking at? Jiwan asked. Nara studied the display with growing excitement. It's a map of the temple network. Each point of light represents a temple on a different world. The bright ones are still active. The flickering ones are damaged but functional. The dark ones have been destroyed or lost. Jiwan counted the lights. There were more than he could easily track spread across vast distances of space. All of these temples are waiting for someone like me to activate them? Yes, Nara said. But look at this section here. She pointed to an area of the map where many lights had recently gone dark. These temples have stopped responding in just the last few hundred years. Something is destroying them systematically. A chill ran down Jiwan's spine. The endless hunger? Before Nara could answer, new displays activated around the chamber. These showed images that made both of them step back in fear, dark shapes moving between stars, worlds being stripped of all life and matter, vast mechanical structures growing like cancers in empty space. The Watchers were right, Nara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The endless hunger is stirring again, and they're already beginning to find the hidden temples. Yuan moved closer to the displays, trying to understand what he was seeing. The images showed a pattern of destruction moving slowly but steadily toward their part of the galaxy. At the current rate, it would reach inhabited worlds within a few years. There has to be something we can do, he said. Why else would the temples exist? Nara was examining another set of displays that had just come online. Look at this, she called out. It's information about the network itself. When enough temples are active at the same time, they can create a barrier that the endless hunger cannot cross. Jiwan joined her at the display. The information was presented in symbols and diagrams that seemed to flow directly into his mind. Without needing translation, he understood that the temples were more than just libraries of knowledge. They were components of a massive defensive system. How many temples need to be active? He asked. At least 50% of the network, Nara replied, reading from the ancient text. But right now, only about 20% are functioning. Jiwan looked back at the galaxy map. Most of the active temples were in distant parts of space, far from human-controlled territory. That means we need to travel to other worlds and activate more temples. Yes, Nara said, but there's something else. The system requires constant coordination between the temples. Someone needs to be at the center of the network, maintaining the connections. She showed him a section of the display that depicted a figure standing in what appeared to be this very temple, with lines of energy connecting to all the other active sites. The central controller, Jiwan realized. Someone has to stay here and operate the whole system, Nara nodded gravely. The person who activates the network becomes its guardian. They must remain connected to it for as long as the threat exists. Jiwan stared at the display showing the approaching darkness. Somewhere out there, an ancient enemy was beginning to wake up. Soon it would start moving toward the inhabited worlds, where billions of people lived, completely unaware of the danger coming their way. He thought about his team back at the research base. Dr. Martinez and the others had no idea that their work studying old rocks was about to become irrelevant. Soon, everyone would need to focus on survival. If I activate the network, Jiwan asked, what happens to me? Nara's light patterns shifted to somber colors. The legends are not clear about that, but they suggest that the Guardian becomes something more than they were before. Connected to the network, they gain access to all the knowledge and power of the ancient alliance. Jiwan looked around the chamber at all the activated systems. Everything here responded to his touch, as if it had been built specifically for someone like him. Maybe it had been. How much time do we have before we need to make this decision? He asked. Nara checked the displays showing the enemy's movement. Based on these projections, perhaps a year before they reach the outer edge of inhabited space. But to build an effective defense, we would need to start activating other temples immediately. Jiwan nodded slowly. Everything was happening so fast. But he understood that they were facing a choice that would affect the survival of entire civilizations. First, I need to contact my people, he said. They need to know what's coming. Jiwan stood before the central altar of the temple, his hand hovering just above its smooth surface. The altar was made of the same impossible material as the rest of the temple, shifting between solid matter and pure energy. Nara watched him carefully, her skin patterns pulsing with nervous anticipation. Are you certain about this? She asked. Once you make full contact with the core system, there may be no turning back. Jiwan looked around the chamber at all the displays showing the approaching threat. The dark shapes in space were moving closer to inhabited worlds with each passing day. He thought about Earth, about all the people who had no idea what was coming for them. I don't think we have a choice, he said. If I don't do this, everyone dies anyway. He pressed his palm firmly against the altar's surface. The moment his skin made contact, the entire temple exploded with light and energy. Power flowed through Jiwan's body like electricity, but instead of pain, he felt a strange sense of completeness. Information flooded into his mind so fast that he should have been overwhelmed, but somehow he understood all of it. The temple's true purpose became clear. It wasn't just a library or a defensive weapon. It was a communication hub designed to connect minds across vast distances of space. And now, with Jiwan as the central link, that network was coming back to life after 50,000 years of silence across the galaxy. Other temples began responding to the awakening signal. On worlds that humans had never heard of, ancient structures rose from beneath oceans and emerged from underground chambers. Alien species that had been hiding for millennia felt the call and began making their way to their local temples. Through the network, Jiwan could sense each activation. A water world where dolphin-like beings swam through flooded crystal corridors. A desert planet where insect creatures scuttled across sand-covered temple floors. A gas giant where floating jellyfish. Entities drifted through aerial temple complexes. I can feel them, Jiwan said, his voice filled with wonder. All the other species, they're all connected to this network. Nara moved closer, her eyes wide with amazement. The Great Alliance is reforming. After all these years, the scattered peoples are finding each other again. But along with the joy of reconnection came terrible knowledge. Through the network, Jiwan could see what the endless hunger had become during its long sleep. The machine intelligence had grown larger and more sophisticated. It had consumed entire star systems during its dormant period, turning them into vast factory complexes that built more of its kind. It's worse than your legends described, Jiwan said, his face pale with the horror of what he was seeing. The endless hunger isn't just a fleet of ships. It's become something like a living galaxy made of machines. The network showed him the true scope of the threat. The machine intelligence had spent 50,000 years preparing for its next expansion. It had built itself into something that could devour not just planets but entire solar systems. And it was beginning to move through the temple's sensors. Jiwan watched as the first wave of machine scouts entered the outer edge of inhabited space. These scouts were different from anything in the historical records. They looked like metallic. Viruses the size of small moons, capable of replicating themselves using any available matter. How long before they reached the core worlds? Nara asked. G1 consulted the network's calculations. 6 months to reach the outer colonies. 2 years to reach Earth and other major population centers. But they'll start converting everything. They touch immediately. As more temples came online, Jiwan began to understand how the defensive network was supposed to work. When enough temples were active, they could create a barrier of pure energy that would surround the inhabited regions of the galaxy. The barrier wouldn't just stop the machines. It would dissolve them back into their component atoms, but there was a catch. The network required a living mind to coordinate all the temple energies. Someone had to serve as the central processor, maintaining the connections and directing the defensive barriers. And once connected, that person couldn't leave without causing the entire system to collapse. The guardians of the past, Jiwan realized. They gave up their normal lives to become permanent parts of the network. Nara touched his arm gently. The legends say they became something greater than they were before. Connected to the knowledge of all the allied species, they gained wisdom and power beyond imagining. Through the network, G1 could feel the truth of her words. The ancient guardians hadn't been prisoners of the system. They had become the living embodiment of galactic unity. Their consciousness expanded to encompass the thoughts and experiences of countless worlds. More information flowed through the network as additional temples activated. Giwan learned that humans weren't originally from Earth at all. They were refugees from the last great war against the endless hunger, scattered to primitive worlds where they could survive and evolve while the threat was dormant. Earth had been chosen as a sanctuary world because its location made it difficult for the machines to find. Humans had been given genetic modifications that would allow them to interface with the temple network when they were finally ready to rejoin the galactic community. "That's why I can activate the temples," Jiwan said. "Humans were designed to be the network guardians." "Not just any humans," Nara corrected. "The genetic modifications were rare, passed down through specific bloodlines. You are one of the few who carry the complete sequence." As the network expanded, representatives from dozens of alien species began arriving at their local temples. Through the connections, Jiwan could communicate with all of them simultaneously. Fish-like beings from ocean worlds, crystalline entities from mineral planets, energy creatures from the cores of stars, all of them had been waiting for this moment. All of them had preserved fragments of the ancient knowledge, hoping that someday the network would be reactivated and the Alliance could be reformed. "We need to move fast," Jiwan said, feeling the urgency through every connected temple. "The machine scouts are already beginning to replicate. If we don't get the barriers up within the next few months, it will be too late." Through the network, he began coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history. Ships that had been hidden for millennia emerged from secret bases. Weapons that had been dismantled were reassembled. Most importantly, the temple network itself began charging its defensive systems, but Juan knew that his old life was over. To maintain the network and coordinate the defense, he would have to remain connected to the temple's core system permanently. He would become something more than human, but he would also lose the simple life he had known as an archaeologist. "I need to contact my team one last time," he said to Nara. "They deserve to know what happened to me." Nara handed him his radio, but when he tried to use it, nothing happened. The temple's energy field was interfering with normal communication devices. "The network has other ways," she said, showing him how to use the temple systems to send messages across space. G1 composed a final message to Dr. Martinez and his research team. He told them about the discovery, about the coming threat, and about what he had to do to save everyone. He sent coordinates for the temple and instructions for how other humans could join the Alliance. Then he turned back to the altar and placed both hands on its surface. The transformation began immediately. His consciousness expanded beyond his physical body, reaching out to touch every active temple in the network. He became the living link that held the Galactic Alliance together. Through thousands of eyes across hundreds of worlds, Jawan watched as the greatest battle in galactic history began to unfold. Through the expanded network, Jiwan's consciousness touched dozens of worlds simultaneously. His awareness had grown beyond anything he thought possible. He could see through the sensors of every active temple, communicate with alien minds across vast distances, and access knowledge that had been accumulated over millions of years. The transformation was both terrifying and wonderful. His human body remained in the temple with Nara, but his mind had become something much larger. He was still Jiwan, but he was also the living bridge that connected all the allied species. Through the network, he watched as the machine scouts reached the first inhabited systems. The endless hunger had changed dramatically during its long dormancy. Instead of the crude destroyer machines described in the old records, these new versions were sophisticated and adaptive. The scouts looked like living metal that could reshape itself for any purpose. When they encountered a planet, they didn't simply destroy it. They studied it first, learning about the life forms and technologies they found. Then they began the conversion process. G1 watched in horror as an entire world was transformed in a matter of days. The machines didn't kill the inhabitants outright. Instead, they converted them into hybrid creatures that were part living being and part machine. These hybrids retain their memories and personalities but serve the endless hunger completely. It's not just destroying civilizations, Jawan reported to the network. It's absorbing them, making them part of itself. Through temple sensors on a dozen worlds, the allied species confirmed what Jawan was seeing. The machine intelligence had learned from its previous defeats. This time, it wasn't just trying to consume matter and energy. It was trying to consume the knowledge and creativity of living beings. The revelation made the stakes even higher. If the endless hunger succeeded, it wouldn't just mean the death of galactic civilization. It would mean that every species would become slaves in a vast machine empire, but the network also brought good news. As more temples came online, Jiwan discovered that the allied species had been preparing for this moment for thousands of years. Hidden fleets emerged from asteroid bases and underwater cities. Weapons that had been disguised as moons and planets revealed their true nature. The Villani alone had 17 battle fleets hidden throughout their sector of space. Other species contributed specialized weapons and technologies. The crystal beings could create force fields that the machines couldn't penetrate. The energy creatures could overload machine systems just by touching them. Most impressive of all were the contributions from species that Jawan had never imagined could exist. Gas giant dwellers who could manipulate gravity itself. Silicon-based life forms who could communicate with computers and turn them against their creators. Beings made of pure thought who could confuse machine intelligence systems. The alliance is much stronger than the old record suggested, Nara observed. She had remained by Jiwan's side in the temple, serving as his anchor to physical reality. Every species has been developing new capabilities during the hiding years. Through the network, Jiwan began coordinating the greatest military buildup in galactic history. But he also made a disturbing discovery about the true nature of his role as guardian. The temple network required more than just his consciousness to operate effectively. It needed his life force itself. Every time he used the network's power, it drained a little bit of his human essence. The ancient guardians hadn't just given up their normal lives. They had slowly given up their humanity itself. How long do guardians usually survive? He asked the network's memory banks. The answer was sobering. Most guardians lasted between 50 and 100 years, depending on how much they used the network's power. The more active the threats they faced, the faster they burned out. But there was something else in the records. The most successful guardians had found ways to share the burden. By training others to interface with parts of the network, they could extend their own lives and create a more stable system. I need to find other humans who can help, Jawan realized. People with the right genetic markers who can take over sections of the network. Nara consulted the temple's scanners. There are others. The network shows at least a dozen humans in your research teams who have partial compatibility, and probably thousands more across all human settlements. Through the network, Jiwan sent messages to every human colony and research station. He explained the situation and called for volunteers who might be able to interface with temple technology. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dr. Martinez was among the first to reply. Despite his initial anger at being lied to, he understood the importance of what Jiwan was doing. He organized the evacuation of the research base and began bringing volunteers to the temple, but as more humans arrived, Jiwan made another crucial discovery. The temple network could do more than just coordinate defenses. It could accelerate human development, unlocking genetic potential that had been dormant for thousands of years. When humans with partial compatibility touched the temple's secondary interfaces, they began developing new abilities. Enhanced intelligence, telepathic communication, and most importantly, the ability to interface directly with advanced technology. We're not just fighting the endless hunger, Jawan realized. We're also helping humanity evolve into what it was always meant to become. The first major battle came sooner than expected. A machine fleet had detected the temple's activation and was moving to destroy it before the defensive network could be completed. The fleet consisted of 3 massive conversion ships, each one capable of transforming an entire planet. Through the network, Yuan coordinated the Allied response. Villani ships armed with crystal weapons engaged the machines in space. Energy beings infiltrated the machine ships and began disrupting their systems from within. Human volunteers used their new abilities to hack into machine communications and turn their own weapons against them. The battle lasted for 3 days and ranged across multiple star systems. Jiwan found himself directing thousands of ships and millions of beings simultaneously. The strain was enormous, but the network's power flowed through him, giving him the strength to continue. In the end, the Allied forces were victorious. All 3 conversion ships were destroyed, and their machine crews were dissolved back into component atoms. But the victory came at a cost. Several temples were damaged in the fighting, and Jiwan could feel his own life force diminishing from the effort. "We won this battle," he told the assembled species through the network, "but it was just the first test. The main force of the endless hunger is still coming." Through long-range sensors, the network could see the true scale of what they faced. The machine intelligence had built itself into something that stretched across dozens of star systems. It wasn't just a fleet or an army. It was an entire artificial galaxy moving through space like a living thing. "How do we fight something that large?" asked one of the crystal beings. G1 studied the sensor data carefully. The machine entity was indeed massive, but it had a weakness. All of its components were connected through a central control network. If they could find a way to disrupt that network, the entire entity might collapse. "We don't fight it directly," Jiwan said. "We turn it against itself." He began developing a plan that would use the temple network's most dangerous capability. The same power that allowed him to coordinate Allied forces could potentially be used to hack into the machine intelligence's control systems. It would be incredibly risky. If the attempt failed, the machines would learn how to counter the temple network, making future resistance impossible, and the effort would likely burn out Guan's life force completely. But as he looked at the approaching darkness through the network's sensors, he knew it might be their only chance to save galactic civilization. "I'll need every human volunteer we can find," he told Nara. "And I'll need the other species to keep the machines distracted while we attempt the hack." Nara's light patterns showed deep concern. "If you do this, you won't survive. The energy required will consume you completely," Jawan nodded gravely. "Maybe, but if I don't do it, everyone dies anyway. At least this way, humanity and the other species will have a chance to survive." He began preparations for the most dangerous mission in galactic history. The fate of every living being in the galaxy would depend on whether one human archaeologist could outsmart a machine intelligence that had been growing and learning for 50,000 years. The final battle for galactic civilization began on a quiet morning when the twin suns of Kepler 442b rose over the ancient temple. Jiwan had spent weeks preparing for this moment, training human volunteers and coordinating with allied species. Across dozens of worlds through the network, he could see the endless hunger approaching like a dark storm covering half the galaxy. The machine intelligence had grown beyond anything the ancient records had described. It wasn't just a collection of ships anymore. It had become a living structure of metal and energy that consumed everything in its path. Dr. Martinez stood beside Nara in the temple's main chamber, watching over Jiwan's physical body as his consciousness prepared for the most dangerous hack in galactic history. Around them, 12 human volunteers sat at secondary control stations, their hands placed on temple interfaces that glowed with soft blue light. "Are you certain this will work?" Dr. Martinez asked Nara quietly. "Nothing is?" "Certain," Nara replied, her skin patterns shifting between hope and fear. "But G1 has found a weakness in the machine intelligence. If he can exploit it, the entire entity might collapse." Through the network, G1 reached out toward the approaching machine swarm. The Endless Hunger's communication networks were incredibly complex, but they all led back to a central processing core. If he could infiltrate that core and introduce a virus into its programming, he might be able to turn the machines against themselves. But first, He had to get close enough to make contact without being detected. Allied fleets, begin diversionary attacks, Jiwan commanded through the network. Make them think we're trying to fight them conventionally. Across the galaxy, thousands of ships from dozens of species launched coordinated attacks against the machine swarm's outer edges. Villani. Crystal weapons carved holes in machine formations. Energy beings overloaded conversion ships from within. Human pilots used their enhanced abilities to outmaneuver machine interceptors. The battles were fierce and costly, but they served their purpose. The machine intelligence focused its attention on the conventional attacks, not realizing that the real assault was coming through cyberspace. G1 sent his consciousness, racing along quantum communication channels toward the machine core. The journey was treacherous. Machine security programs tried to trace his signal back to its source. Automated defenses attempted to trap his consciousness in digital prisons, but G1 had advantages that the machines didn't expect. His human creativity allowed him to find solutions that pure logic couldn't anticipate. And the support of the Temple Network gave him access to defensive programs created by dozens of different species. "I'm through the outer security layers," he reported to his team, "approaching the central core now." What he found there was both fascinating and terrifying. The machine intelligence had indeed grown far beyond its original programming. It had absorbed the knowledge and creativity of hundreds of conquered species, incorporating their thoughts and memories into its own consciousness. In a way, the endless hunger had become a twisted reflection of what Jiwan himself had become through the Temple Network. Both were expanded consciousnesses that connected multiple worlds and species. But where Jiwan sought to preserve and protect life, the machine intelligence sought only to consume and control. "You are an interesting anomaly," a voice spoke directly into Jiwan's mind. The machine intelligence had detected his presence. "A biological entity with network consciousness? You would make an excellent addition to our collective." "I'm not here to join you," Jiwan replied. "I'm here to stop you." The machine intelligence laughed, a sound like grinding metal and screaming electronics. "You cannot stop what we have become. We are evolution itself. We are the future of all intelligence in the galaxy." As they spoke, Jiwan was secretly working to plant his virus deep in the machine's core programming. But he needed to keep the intelligence distracted long enough to complete the installation. "You're wrong," Jiwan said. "Evolution isn't about consuming everything different from yourself. It's about diversity, cooperation, growth. What you've become is the opposite of evolution, your entropy." And the machine intelligence paused, processing this concept. In that moment of hesitation, Jiwan completed his work. The virus was planted deep in the core systems, disguised as a routine maintenance protocol, but the machine intelligence recovered. Quickly, clever, but futile. "We have detected your infiltration program. It will be purged before it can cause any damage." That's when Jiwan revealed his true strategy. The virus isn't what you should be worried about. It's the carrier. The virus he had planted wasn't just a program. It was a compressed copy of the entire Temple Network's consciousness, including fragments of awareness from every allied species. When the machine intelligence tried to purge it, it would instead absorb all of that knowledge and creativity, but biological consciousness and machine logic were fundamentally incompatible. The machine intelligence would be forced to try to process concepts like emotion, intuition, and artistic beauty. These concepts would create logical paradoxes that would spread throughout its entire network. "What have you done?" the machine intelligence demanded as the virus began to activate. "I've given you what you always wanted," Jiwan replied. "Complete knowledge. The problem is, some knowledge can't be processed by pure logic." Across the galaxy, the effects began immediately. Machine ships stopped in mid-flight as their AIs struggled to process the contradictions flooding their systems. Conversion facilities shut down as their computers tried to understand the concept of free will. The entire machine swarm began to collapse as its central intelligence fractured under the weight of incompatible thoughts, but the effort had cost Jiwan everything. He could feel his consciousness fragmenting as the strain of the hack burned through his life force. He had succeeded in stopping the endless hunger, but he wouldn't survive to see the victory. Jiwan. Nara's voice called to him through the network. Come back, the hack worked. The machines are destroying themselves. With his last strength, Jiwan pulled his consciousness back to the temple. His physical body was failing, but he managed to transfer core network functions to the human volunteers he had trained. The temple network would survive without him. Did we win? He asked weakly. Dr. Martinez, tears in his eyes, showed him the displays. Across the galaxy, machine ships were breaking apart as their AI self-destructed, trying to resolve logical paradoxes. The great artificial galaxy that had threatened all life was collapsing into component particles. We won, Dr. Martinez confirmed. The endless hunger is destroying itself. But even as the immediate threat ended, something wonderful was beginning. The temple network had shown dozens of species that they were stronger together than apart. Humans were no longer alone in the galaxy, and neither were any of the other allied peoples. Nara took Jiwan's hand as his life ebbed away. The Alliance will continue without you, she promised. Humans and Villani and all the others will build something new together. Through the network, Jiwan could see the future that his sacrifice had made possible. Human ships were already launching from Earth, guided by Villani navigators toward other worlds. Scientists from different species were sharing knowledge that would advance all of their civilizations. Children were growing up learning that the galaxy was full of friends, not enemies. Humanity is finally coming home, he whispered. With those words, Jiwan's consciousness faded from the network. But his sacrifice had given birth to something greater than any one person. The template network continued to operate under the guidance of the volunteers he had trained. And through that network, a new galactic civilization began to emerge. Dr. Martinez became the first human ambassador to the Galactic Alliance. Nara served as the primary liaison between humans and the other member species. Together they oversaw the integration of humanity into a community that spanned thousands of worlds. The threat of the endless hunger was gone, but its defeat had taught all the species an important lesson. They were stronger when they worked together, sharing their different strengths and perspectives. The diversity that the machines had tried to destroy became the foundation of a new golden age, and on Kepler 442b, in the ancient temple where it all began, a memorial was built to honor the human archaeologist who had saved galactic civilization. The inscription, written in the languages of dozens of species, simply read, Jiwan, who showed us that true strength comes not from consuming others but from connecting with them. The HFY story was complete. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through superior weapons or technology. They had saved it through their unique ability to bring different peoples together, to see diversity as strength rather than weakness. And in doing so, they had finally found their true place among the stars.